I wanna give you some bad advice.
It's very natural.
You heard
I
it
didn't
right.
notice.
No?
Bad advice.
Hello, welcome to Bad Advice, where we talk to early stage founders about the crazy things they're doing in their companies that you should probably not listen to, but you should consider. Today, I have Hai with me, founder of Cats with Bats, and that's what we're going to talk about. He's a solo founder, and he's going to talk about why he's been a solo founder for over a year, building his company. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sahan.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Thank you for coming all the way from Ottawa.
From Ottawa. That's where I live now.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Hai, like you said. I used to be a software engineer for a couple of years, and actually went to school to study film, but never ended up working any day in the industry. But now I'm a founder, so I started a company called Cats with Bats, like you said. It's basically a place for AI engineers to find and create content, like video tutorials about AI engineering stuff. So stuff like, RAG, AI agent, that kind of stuff. And in my free time, I run this community called AI Tinkers, which is about 800 people in Ottawa, and we meet once a month. About 150 people showed up, and we talk about AI stuff. It's really fun.
Nice. How big is that community in total?
So it started in Seattle originally.
Oh, okay.
One of the guys who started it was actually the lead, or I guess the co-creator of the GitHub Copilot team.
Wow, good.
At GitHub. And they grew from Seattle. Seattle has like thousands of people, but it kind of grew out to the world. So like New York City has a chapter, Boston has a chapter. We were fortunate enough that, Ottawa was like probably the biggest chapter in Canada in general.
Nice.
And, all the world from India to like Malaysia to like Eastern Europe, there's a chapter in every major city. Paris, obviously, because, the Hugging Face is banking them there. So it's really nice to be part of a global community, but also like building something very unique at home in Ottawa. So yeah, that's AI Tinkers for you.
So what's your crazy advice, that something crazy you're doing in your company that's out of the norm, that most people would consider bad advice?
Yes, straight to the meat. Okay, so I have a lot of like things that I do that are a little bit different from other people. So I started Cats with Bats by myself. I've been building the product for I think about 7-8 months. Pivoted like 4 or 5 times. Had so many different ideas about what the product was going to be, but turns out not. And I talked to you a couple of times as well, which also influenced some of my pivots.
Oh no!
So we'll chat about that. But essentially, I build a product and I do sales and I basically do everything. And it's very tough, because I'm doing this by myself. Mm-hmm. When I'm doing sales, nobody's building the product. When I'm building the product, nobody's doing go-to-market stuff. Thinking about the bigger picture. So being able to balance all that is quite tough. But again, here's the fun part. I don't have to tell anybody about anything. If I talk to customers, if I have a key insight, I go back, I change my roadmap. I don't have to explain it to anybody. So the iteration is really quick.
So there's no meetings, no convincing, no misalignment, because there's one person in the team that's making all the decisions.
Yeah, I think so it's kind of funny because I still have to convince myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when I put something on the roadmap, or when I have a half-baked idea that I got from talking to a prospect, usually I have to mull on that for a little bit. So maybe I'll write down some notes. I put down the feature, but then I don't really buy into that yet. So that's when before I was just like, oh, maybe I'm just lazy. But now I realize that, oh, I don't believe in that enough. So let me have more conversations with design partners. Let me have more conversations with some of the prospects that I'm talking to.
Yeah.
So for example, Cats with Bats launched about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, Halloween night. I stay in, my friends went out, partying, whatever. I stay in and I had a wait list, and I already promised people that I was going to launch it. So I launched it, and the reason why I launched that day was because I had an insight about 2 weeks prior for videos. So Cats with Bats in the beginning was a chat interface. And it almost came full circle because I have backgrounds in film and videography. So I just thought, one weekend, maybe I would prototype something that has to do with videos. So right now, the version of CatsWithBats that most people see is you can upload a video of a coding tutorial, and then after like 5 minutes, video gets processed. When you're coding alongside the video, the person's talking, you can click on this button called X-ray, and then like the code snippet is extracted from the frame. It's on the side. Hit one button, and you can copy that off. You don't have to like type everything out, and you can talk to like the AI for like the videos. But that was built in like a week. Like that was like an insight that I had a hunch about when I talked to people, and then I put it on my roadmap, and I was like, I don't fully believe in this yet, but let me talk to some more people. So I did, and turns out the reactions for the feature was like better than I expected. So I went and built it in a week, and turns out it was the feature that kind of like carried the launch to the waitlisters.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like having a community inside your head, kind of like debating, like, oh, is this the right thing to do? Like, where does this idea come from? So I'm not necessarily like debating with like my teammates, but more so different parts of myself.
So do you advocate for doing solo in like early stage?
So like starting a company solo is very hard. And this is like the number one advice that people have been giving me since the beginning, which is like, don't do it solo. Like, because the people can see like how much, work has to be done every day. Because you run your own company, right? And you know how much work it is every day to wake up and like, first of all, you have some ups and downs. The highs are whatever, but the lows are like super low. Mm-hmm. And like, imagine not having, your coworkers and like your teammates being there to talk things through. Because as a founder, like you don't, like this stuff you talk about, like you can't talk to your family. Like, don't unless they started companies before, they wouldn't get it. But for me, that's like the number one thing that my friends and my other founder friends usually tell me. It's like, maybe spend the next like 2 months trying to find a co-founder. But I think either way, it's gonna be okay. I kind of want to see what it's like to, be in this day and age with all the AI tools out there, like Devin just came out recently. I want to see if I can be able to like start this and then carry it up to maybe like 10K MR or something like that without having to bring on somebody else.
See how far you can take it without additional resources.
Yeah, it's almost like betting on myself, which is a high risk, but if I go down, when I go down, seeing like, I bet on myself for like a year and a half, and if it works out, so that's cool. It's bring on some team members, but if not, it's just, I made a bad bet, so
yeah. So it all would come down to you essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. So you don't advocate being solo, but you are solo. You've been solo for a year, more than a year. How do you, why?
So I only allow myself to do two things. So like, first of all, talk to customers, so I can build a product. Talking to investors, trying to find a co-founder. I honestly never like was interested in doing any of those things, and I ended up not doing them. And I'm not saying these things are bad. Like I'm saying like,
haven't been a priority.
Yeah, like either procrastination or like, maybe just been too deep in the deep ends to be able to think about like, maybe if I get a proper co-founder or somebody who's like amazing, then I would have been able to 2x my productivity or something like that. Yeah. But again, like going back to like the betting on myself conversation, it's like, kind of want to see how this goes, Like 'cause I've built CatsWithBats.
Yeah.
Like with my bare hands.
And you've gotten customers.
And I've gotten paying customers. It's just like, it's really, I really like crazy ideas. And I think that somebody said this maybe on a podcast recently, but they're like, when it comes down to like making a decision about your life or a career or whatever, it's choose the one that makes a better story for later. So for me, it's like, oh yeah, I can go and find a co-founder, which could either go either way, right? Good or bad. And then if it goes down, it's gonna be one of those startups that had a bad co-founder, and then it's gonna go down. Or I can play in the narrative like, okay, it's 2024. This might be a huge company eventually, built by one person with a bunch of AI tools in it. And honestly, I wanna see how far I can take that narrative.
Yeah, so you're willing to try it but you're not, married to that idea of being like a solo founder, right?
Yeah, there are trade-offs to everything, obviously. Like right now, people are looking at my bet and be like, it's playing out very slowly, right? So
Yeah.
you gotta give me like maybe like 5 more years to see like how that plays out.
100%. But I think that's the case for every company. Is like if you ask them, they're like, "Oh, it's going slowly. It's not going as fast as I'd like to."
Yeah.
You always want it to go faster. So it's hard to say, I guess. What are the pros and cons? You talked about the pros, which is you don't have anybody to talk to in a good sense. Like you don't have to convince them, bring them along the journey or whatever, and waste time. You're just building and getting customers. What are the cons other than the emotional stuff and the 2x? Is there any other cons people are not seeing?
Yeah, there's also like the bad ideas too. So if I have a bad ideas, all of my ideas seems great in my head, right? Everything seems like I thought of it. I convinced myself it's a good idea. Nobody's gonna be there to tell me it's a bad idea. And I'm trying to think of a bad idea okay, so in the beginning, I spent like about like 3 or 4 months building this chat feature that now I don't even use.
Got it.
So, committed to building things early on without, talking to early users and stuff like that. That was a bad idea, but I convinced myself to do it. I was like, I can feel it in my bone that if I can build this right, people will use it. But the reactions to the features once I started talking to design partners was very lukewarm. And it's not until I built a video feature that people will like had a reaction that was like, I can tell what's gonna happen when I show it to somebody.
Yeah.
Like this new video feature. But like in the beginning, it's just like I was so convinced of what I was building that I show it to people, and then people who reacted, in a way that I didn't expect, I would just wrote it off as like, oh, they don't get it, or like they're not my ICP.
Got it.
But it turns out like made a big mistake, and obviously you have founders friends, you have like people who advise you and stuff like that. They can tell you stuff,
but I think the co-founder, that kind of stuff also happens with co-founders, because companies with co-founders also build things that nobody uses. But I think where the co-founder is really helpful is you have an idea and they build upon that idea and make that idea like 2x better, right? And then you build off their idea and you make something 5x better, right?
Yeah.
It sort of feeds off each other. So do you think like this approach of betting on yourself, going solo for as long as what do you think is rooted in? Childhood, education,
this
film?
is spicy stuff. Yeah.
I don't know, because I feel like for me, the stuff I'm doing, I think a lot of it is rooted in my like childhood or education or something, like having an engineering background or whatever.
When you were growing up, were your parents like very strict?
No. But I was doing a lot of things solo. Like
Okay.
I was always into experimentation, innovation. Like when I was a kid, I would just glue stuff together all the time. Like I would just make stuff. So I'm like, oh, I just like making stuff.
Yeah. So our backgrounds are a little bit different, right? So like I'm Asian, Vietnamese, and you're Persian, right?
Yeah.
So in Vietnam, there's like a expectation that your kids should grow up to be super independent. Not in a sense that like you can people. It's funny because like people will live with their parents, but at the same time like they don't when they struggle. It's not like people would jump in and like support you emotionally. At least that's what it is when at least for me growing up in Vietnam. So I'm wondering if, because you mentioned being super independent and having that mindset growing up, I wonder if that's like how was it like growing up in Iran, and like
It's like I think it's the typical Asian thing, which is like everybody expects their kid to be like top engineer, top scientist, lawyer, doctor, whatever. So there's like high expectations, but other than that, like, there's not like a lot of like arts. You see a lot of Iranian kids, like they all come from engineering or, something like that. There's not a lot of focus on like more like soft skills, especially in education too. We always have trouble collaborating, communicating, because even in school, the focus is on the soul, an individual individual contributor. It creates great individual contributors.
Yeah.
So that's sort of I would say the culture.
Yeah, and the word individual contributor makes you super independent in everything you do.
Yeah.
Because I know you started Notification API, or you used to be at Aorga, but when you started Notification API, you made a point to like not go talk to VCs and like not. Do you have a co-founder or you just?
I do, yeah. I do
Okay.
have a co-founder, Mohammed. He's an amazing software developer as well. Yeah. So we kind of, so maybe it's like engineering background, two software developer co-founders.
Yeah.
Super technical, and we always look at every problem from a product perspective first. As a customer.
Which is another hot take, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, if I would advise people to do it, but that's how we do it, and it comes from our background. Yeah. So I think we just like solving issues, right? So if a customer is having issue, instead of thinking of it from, is this a marketing issue, is it a messaging issue, we immediately go like, this must be a product issue.
Yeah, which is like something that I actually took an advice from you. So I took advice from you and another one of my friend named Thomas. So you said that you guys were just building and building until like the sales calls gets easier, right? And then people reacted to your product a little bit better. And then you can evidently see that the sales got better over time.
Yeah.
Because the product improved so much, right? I had a similar advice from my friend Thomas. So Thomas used to work at this company called Crank Software in Ottawa, and they sold it. It's like a SDK for building GUI for like car infotainment systems, like super niche.
Super cool.
Yeah, but essentially, what Thomas told me was he said that they were just building for like the demo call. It's like they were just building until they get the right reactions on the demo calls.
Yeah.
And like just that was like the North Star, and then that became my North Star, which is like
That's
just
interesting.
build until we jump on the next call. You can kind of like know what the magic moment is for like the person.
Yeah, it's kind of like I have this duality about it. I also like back of my mind, I know it's also kind of wrong to do.
Why is it wrong?
Because the end goal is making money. The end goal of any company is like make enough money to pursue your other goals or whatever it is. Like, but the meaning of company is to make money from your product. So whether it's your product impressing the customer or it's your sales process impressing the customer, I think the outcome is the same. You're gonna end up, if the product is not shit, you're gonna end up with happy customers. So I think, over-indexing on the product is wrong in a sense, but for me, it's not just the money. I also want to enjoy working in this company.
Yeah.
I want to also enjoy being a CEO who can jump into the code and just do something crazy there, right? Versus just focusing on the sales and marketing. So I think it comes to your personality too. Like what type, you mentioned you like to see how far you can take it as a solo founder, right? That's not maybe the rational thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's the thing that would make you happy, and I think that ultimately trumps everything else.
Yeah, I think each of us got into like entrepreneurship for like one reason or another, but at least for you and me, I feel like we really want to build stuff and build things that people enjoy and like using.
Yeah.
And we can be proud of.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one of the main reasons why I wanted to start Cats with Bats. It's just because nobody else is going to build this. Like I know for a fact, nobody else is like has a background in like film, make videos, and then like know a little bit about like full stack development and have been playing with AI. Like I have to be the guy who built this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your background with film.
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
explain on that? Like, how did you get into
Yeah.
film, and then how did you get into software development?
Yeah, it's funny because like, we were just like messing around with cameras and microphones, like just behind the scenes. But so I applied to college in the U.S. So in the U.S., like when we say colleges, it's just equivalent to universities, colleges and universities, and then there's like community college, which is more like trade school and stuff like that. So I applied to like 12 different schools, and my angle was I was gonna go and study film because I was making like short films in high school, all kinds, and I was like winning some like prizes and stuff like that. Ended up getting like a decent scholarship to go to the school called Denison University. So Denison is where Steve Carell, who's Michael Scott in The Office, and Jennifer Garner went to, and I think Michael Eisner, who was the CEO at Disney at one point. Lots of Republicans for some reason. Old school.
Which state is this?
Ohio.
Okay.
swing state. But yeah, like it was a very interesting place. If you look it up on Urban Dictionary, there's some really fun stuff they say about Denison University. But
We'll put it on the screen.
yeah. Go look it up, Urban Dictionary. So essentially, when I was there, I was, I majored in film. So I took a bunch of film classes. And then I think halfway through, my parents were just asking me, like, what are you going to do with your film degree? So I was like, all right, well, I'll pick up, like, economics. So I did a double major in economics and film, just because my sister did economics in college. Turns out the experience was not what I expected it to be. And this is what I think Spike Lee said as well. Spike Lee is one of the directors, like all-time classics. He said that people go to film school not to study film, but like to have access to equipment, because filmmakers are poor. So I had the same idea. I was like, I wanted to use some like cool film cameras and 4K cameras. I had like a little Canon camera at the time that I ended up using for like 7 years. But turns out the program was mostly me sitting in like a theater room watching like really old movies and writing papers about them.
You could do that yourself, I guess.
Yeah, go on YouTube or go on Netflix. But so for the longest time I didn't like it. But it turns out I learned a bunch of stuff. I learned that I was like the person on campus who had like the most amount of like technical knowledge about how to use cameras, how to use Adobe Premiere and like all these things, because people like had no idea. They'd just been watching a lot of movies growing up, and that's why they signed up for the program. Mm-hmm. I was the guy who was like, knows everything, the ins and outs of like what kind of lenses and like, editing techniques, stuff like that. But what turns out, I learned that everything in film, like the way that you shoot something, what angle, what lens you use, everything has to come down to why you're doing it. Like why you're shaking the camera in this shot. Like there has to be a reason for everything that happens on the screen. There has to be a reason for why you pan the camera from left to right and stuff like that. It has to motivate certain themes and stuff like that. So it turned me into somebody who value like the substance more, like the content more than like the gearhead that I used to be. So
Got it.
I used to like just, get as many like, magazines about cameras as possible and just like reading them and like gog over like, oh, like this $2,000 lens, like, but now I'm like, I travel with like very small compact gears, and it's all about the story and what I'm trying to say in my videos now. I still make videos like either like tutorials for like coding stuff or like, for fun, but it's more about like the story and like what I'm trying to say now than like, the blur background or like the sharp image, stuff like that. So definitely learned something from the film program. So maybe you didn't waste money there.
No, I think you're using those skills right now. Are you starting a podcast, or do you want to talk about that?
So I started a webinar series under the name of AI Tinkers Ottawa. So we bring people on to talk about like open source projects, basically. Nice. So I think one of the first guests was Killian Lucas, who's the lead maintainer for this project called Open Interpreter. So Open Interpreter came out, I think, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. And the whole idea is that, ChatGPT has like a code interpreter.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know much about the internals, but I can imagine. Yeah.
Essentially, you can run like Python code in ChatGPT, and it'll put in a sandbox, and you can run like Panda and stuff like that, so it can help you do like data analysis and stuff like that. So Open Interpreter was like a reaction to that. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, this is an open source version of that. You can run whatever model you want, runs locally in your computer, and you can use like API models like ChatGPT, GPT-4, or you can use like, Ollama, and then you can have like local models. Yeah. So we had Killian on, and it turns out to be one of the most popular like videos on the channel. The Open Interpreter has like at the time 56,000 GitHub stars or something like that. And Killian turns out to be an avid AI tinkers. Like they host AI tinkers in Seattle. And then we had other people on, and then I think it's just you probably know this too. I don't know about you. You gotta tell me why you start your podcast. But for me, at least the podcast is just an excuse for me to talk to cool people. Like there are people that otherwise I probably don't have access to, but now I can just like DM them and be like, hey, we got a channel, we had so and so on. Would you be down to sit on like a call and talk for like 45 minutes about whatever you want? And usually the reaction is positive. Yeah. So like about you. So this is one of the first episodes for your podcast.
Yeah.
Why did you start this?
It's very interesting because my other guests asked me that too, and everybody, you talk to about podcasts. Like one of their questions, like, why do you want to do this? And for the longest time, I didn't have a good answer. I was like, I don't know. It just feels like something I must do. Then I look back, I'm like, I realized why. Since I was a kid, I would write content, I would create blogs, I would create websites, and now podcast is just, I think, an extension of content creation, sort of. That's technical, about the stuff I would enjoy, which is startups. And this is something I naturally do. We grab a beer, we talk about, startups. I do that probably every week or bi-weekly with my friends. So I was like, I could just combine the two.
So like as a way to like express your ideas.
Yeah, I think it's just so ingrained to me. Like, I had a blog or something since I was like, I think 12 or 13.
No, wait, what were you writing about at 12?
I don't know, just like
Okay,
my
that's 360.
thoughts, like emo teenager thoughts.
Quick scope.
Yeah, like I don't even remember, but it was I think mostly my thoughts. To my friends, I really enjoyed that. Then I did some Instagram stuff, like more scenery stuff. I had websites, a bunch of so I think it just came naturally to me. It's something I would like to do. I wasn't sure about the topic. Was it going to be something light and fun with my friends, or is it going to be technical? Then I thought that, I'm already, having these conversations with startup founders.
Yeah.
So I thought this makes sense. And the angle about the bad advice is that this is what nobody talks about. Nobody talks about being a solo founder or, why you should do it, even though it goes against the grain. Nobody talks about, personal debt. And everybody says don't do it, but what about the people who've done it? Like, what do they have to say, right?
Yeah.
So talking about the angles nobody talks about. I enjoy that, yeah.
Yeah, hot takes and ideas that are a little bit contrarian.
Out there, crazy, yeah.
Yeah. I enjoy it. 'Cause every time I talk to you, there's always something that I always come out of it changing something about what I believe in and maybe like taking something with me that I can try. So like always,
that means a lot.
Yeah, I always appreciate our jam sessions because I live in Ottawa, you live in Toronto now. So like we always do it over like Slack.
Yeah.
So, but
I really appreciate it because that's the whole goal, is for people to see like different angles that they never thought about. Not to necessarily do what they're doing, but to think about their own world and their company a little differently. Think outside the box. And I mentioned this in the intro episode, which is if you look at these successful companies and look at their stories, it sounds very crazy. Like they're not the generic, they went and hired the right team and scaled and became successful.
give me one example.
I think the prime example is Uber, Airbnb, Twitter. I love Twitter because it's about product mostly. The Airbnb and Uber is more about marketing and being aggressive, just on the competition side. But Twitter is very technical. 140 characters forever, for the longest time, which is so crazy. Like you got millions, hundreds of millions of customers who they're typing all day. Why won't you make it longer and increase engagement? That's what all the users, I'm sure they're asking for that. Every other social platform at that time, they're like doing videos, doing, whatever, different types of content. They're like, no, 140 characters, that's it. And imagine how many meetings they've had about this.
Yeah.
Probably thousands of meetings about, no, we got to keep it 140 character. And it worked, it's crazy. It's against don't increase user engagement. Don't build the thing that everybody in the market wants and expects. I'm that's kind of crazy. I want to know about those boardroom meetings, about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were 140 characters for 11 years. And then after 11 years, I think 2016 or something. And then since then until now, 280 characters. It's not even
like a full essay. You can't write one.
Yeah, it's so crazy, right? Very contrarian.
Mm-hmm.
And the Uber and Airbnb ones are all about like competing in the market, getting early adopters. They did some crazy things, which is very interesting to read.
Yeah.
I would love to do maybe a video on them one day, you know?
I'm more familiar with like the origin story from like Airbnb because they say it so much on like the YC like videos. But what about Uber?
Uber, I was reading about like some practices they did. Like essentially their motto was like business is war. So they would literally on the Lyft map, they would hunt down drivers and they would recruit them.
No, that's crazy.
Or their staff would go, now I don't know if these are real, these are stuff I've read online. Their staff would sign up for Lyft, order rides and then cancel, thousands.
That's crazy.
It's super crazy and out there that nobody talks to you. You never heard about this. I never heard about this until a few days ago. I'm like, why isn't nobody talking about this? Because I think it's these crazy things that make those companies successful. Whether it's good or bad to do, like that's a different conversation. But I think we've been told this, not lie, but like this generic story of like, you have a good idea, you raise a good amount of money
Biggest
from
lie
VC, you hire a good team.
God.
And it kind of magically, it all works out.
That is so not the game. Like if I knew that wasn't the game, I probably wouldn't have started a company. It's like, you remember? So we saw each other in person. I think last year at Collision, right? On the conferences here downtown in Toronto. I drove here with two of my close friends, Josh and Leo. And recently, Josh and Leo got into YC, and they're gonna move out to San Francisco, probably forever, which makes me a little bit sad. But here's the story why it's important. They're kind of like you, and in many ways. But when people ask me, like when I came back from Toronto, people were asking me, like, "Hey, like, how was Collision and stuff like that?" To be honest, I didn't really remember much about the conference. I remember one thing, so a couple things. You were on stage making like some funny jokes at one point. Talking smack about I forgot what it was, but you were on stage
or breathing or
yeah. So that was funny, but it was the thing that stood out to me the most from that trip was actually to see my friends do it in person and like see how they embody this idea of like running through walls and trying everything possible. And now when I hear like when you say like Uber was doing all these crazy things, I'm like, yeah, they sound crazy, but if I were them, I would probably try it too.
Yeah, well, Uber exists, you use Uber every day, and I don't think I've never met someone use Lyft,
Yeah.
Where are they? I don't even know if they exist or not, like.
Pretty much.
Do they?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the presence in San Francisco is more than around the world.
Got it.
Not as much as Uber. I think they lost their market, like the North American market.
So now that it's debatable whether those things are ethical or not, but well, the case of Twitter is like, well, that's completely ethical. Like they just touched their product, right? About that 140 character, that's the product decision you can make. That's crazy to everybody else, but
yeah. But like back to my friends, like so what they did was. And at the time, I didn't really understand this, but now looking back, I understood that why they did it. So like, they would try everything possible. Like, they had no business going to Collision. Like, their ICP is not there, but they're there. They're talking to everybody. They're talking to potential investors. They have their pitch nailed down to the T, both the CTO and the CEO. They went to It's a funny thing. They went to Best Buy and bought a 32-inch TV, and they put it on their booth, and then returned it the next day. Came back to Best Buy, returned it, got full money back. But like that alone got them like probably the most amount of foot traffic from that era in the conference. And I remember them coming back to Ottawa and then later on going to SF to try to raise their pre-seed, which they ultimately failed, and then pivot a couple more times. And I at the time, because I didn't know that the outcome was gonna be eventually that they got into YC and like got some traction with their sales. But at the time when I looked at them, I was like, they just keep trying. Like if I were them, I probably would have quit and do something else. But it was, and when they got like early traction with their new focus on Deal Desk. So Outlet is it's the company. It's a tool. It's an AI agent for like Deal Desk people to like close deals faster. And the goal is basically to have like AEs and BDRs be able to close a large complex deal without having to like have too much like legal and like accounting talks, and they can just use like Perplexity like search to go through old deals and then like craft a new one really quickly. But essentially, they just try everything that they could possibly think of, and I found that to be very inspiring. And being able to see yours journey as well. You know, we talked before, like at the time I thought, you know, your decision to not talk to investors, not talk to VCs, and just like bootstrap, even though your last company before that, Hey Orca, was a VC backed company. I thought that was like kind of like a pretty interesting decision. And being able to see you guys' journey since then has been super inspiring as well, because now, like, you know, you closed the deals that we were talking about 2 or 3 years ago that you really wanted to close. And I would love to hear about that from you as well, because like being able to see that, I think the key is to be able to see that somebody going through that in real time is such a profound effect on like how I view the world.
No, it's not about going at it solo or like, you know, hating on VCs or anything. It's exactly about what makes sense for the business at this point in time. It's like, I don't think if they gave me VC money right now, I wouldn't know how to utilize it properly. And I would probably just crash the company into the ground. That's the reason I'm not raising. You know, there's nothing about like, oh, I want to hold on to the shares, or, you know, I want to, something like that. It's just what makes sense for the company at that time. And what makes sense for the company at any time, I think my hypothesis is that with every successful company is that it's a crazy thing usually. It's not the normal do A, B, and C and D that these companies have done, and it's going to work out for you too. I don't think that's the case for most successful companies.
I agree. Here's some hot takes. So so in Ottawa, there's this place called Invest Ottawa, and lots of founders hang out there. And like, you know, when you go talk to people, the general sentiment is that if you go through, like, if you know the steps to like do customer discovery and all these things, the expectation is that you will land somewhere that is closer to product market fit. But the reality is you do whatever it takes to get to product market fit, and it's almost heartbreaking to see people waiting years, being stuck and like not knowing what to do because they followed that structure. You know, like there are people who really buy into like the lean startup and all these things.
Why is it not working? You know, well,
I did all the steps. You know, like I talked to 15 customer prospects today. Like, why is nothing coming out of that? And I mean, it's hard, but the truth is like you just keep doing it until you see something.
It's not supposed to work like that. Okay, so piggyback from talking about how these playbooks, like the lean startup playbook and stuff, doesn't work. What did you do that worked for you in terms of your GTM, your first few customers?
I think the lean startup stuff doesn't really emphasize like your unique situations. They give examples of like, you know, popular pop culture companies, but but everyone has like their own kind of like angle to everything, I found. And like you can't find like examples of companies that rely on content creation to go to market. So that's why content creation is my thing. And I learned this from working with this guy named Greg Smythe, who was actually used to be at Tesla as an engineering manager or a manager, and then started making content for like a couple of years. And we worked together for like about 4 years, actually, both on like some of his nonprofit stuff, also content, but also after his career at Tesla, for people. So from that experience, I actually learned a lot from him in terms of like about like how the VC world works, how he like angel investing works, what it's like to live in Silicon Valley. But more importantly, we learned together about what makes a piece of content good, and what you can do with an audience once you have like a sizable audience. So people, when they read the Lean Startup, like there's no example about go to market with content, but that's what I'm doing right now. So what I do is initially I started a YouTube channel because my initial idea was I was gonna do like a consulting company. But But then, the idea of a product company just kind of like haunted me. So I switched to building a product company, which is Cats with Bats. And I kept the same YouTube channel. But I see my batchmates, like, so I was hanging out with like founders in Ottawa, and, there's always talks about like getting your first customer and stuff like that. And, the advice is always pretty vague, but the principle is always like find people that you know in your network. And I think I can't really say that I planned for YouTube to work. It just worked, and then I realized that I can use it for Cats with Bats. So I was making YouTube videos about like a few open source projects that I was doing, and then I think one video kind of just took off.
You have like how many followers?
Like just
Subs?
14,000, 15,000.
That's crazy. Like that's not easy to do, I assume.
And I have like 12 videos on there. Like not a whole lot.
So how do you get 14K subs with 12 videos?
Yeah, a bunch of things had to happen. So on the surface, it's like, YouTube videos show up and then subscribers potentially go up. But it's a little bit deeper than that. So I was contributing code to LangChain, which is like an open source framework for LLM applications, one of probably the earliest one. And I was, I built this one open source project, which is use LLM to like do web scraping and data extraction. This was when like data extraction with GPT-4 was kind of like just became somewhat like common. Yeah. So like my repo was one of the first that was available for everybody to use, and that took off. I ended up merging some of the use cases to LangChain repo, and then from there got connected with the people who are working at LangChain. And from there, I thought to myself, oh, like this video did pretty well. People start adding me on LinkedIn and Twitter and started reaching out for like consulting stuff and stuff like that. Let me just make more. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but let me just make more. And that turns out to be the key insight after like maybe 6 months or so, was that as long as the content is good and people who are coming through are the kind of people that you want to build something for, just channel them to what you're building. So I don't even mention this in the videos, but I would always have like links to Cats with Bats in the description. And like 181 people like sign up for the app.
Wow.
And I didn't even say a word about the app. And the key is that, and even now I work with a few, one or two companies with their content strategy, and these are all like AI dev tool companies. And people like to treat these viewers as just numbers, but like I like to think of them as like real people. Like these are real people making real decisions, and you should be as respectful of their time and like what they're looking for. And if you can just give that to them, the bar is pretty low. So if you could give that to them like more than 3 times, they will click on whatever you want them to click on. They will trust you with whatever opinions that come out of your mouth. Like whatever product you recommend, they will trust that.
So your customers, did they come from those consulting engagements or from the YouTube or from the LangChain contributions?
Strictly YouTube.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
They will watch your YouTube and then come to your website and then...
Yeah, and I didn't even say anything about it. And it like you can go into like content creation, like strategies and stuff. Like difference between like, sometimes people say like, oh, go check out my thing in like the video that they were giving something to the audience, which, a lot of people do that. But like the way that I prefer to do is, if you want to make an ad, just make an ad like separately.
Yeah.
Like your core viewers will click on that. That way you don't muddle like the line between like giving value and like, asking. Because there's always this like invisible line of like asking for, giving too little, asking for too much. People who make like 2 videos and then start asking right away, like, hey, like go sign up for this thing. And Alex Hormozy is actually a great, influencer to follow for stuff like this, like, content creation. That's in the educational side of things. But yeah, like the first 150 users on Cats with Bats came from YouTube. And paid customers also came from YouTube. And it was funny because when I launched it, I didn't think people would care. I had a list of like waitlisters, and I just emailed them like, hey, today's Monday. By Wednesday, I'm gonna launch this. Watch out for it. And I didn't think people cared. Nobody replied. I'm like, I can probably miss a day or two. Like, I still have a lot of work to do. By Tuesday night, people were emailing me about it. They were like, are you still alive? Like, is this still happening? And I think it's those like little moments that made me realize that, oh, these are real people. Like, these are not just numbers.
Yeah.
Like, people care. People like, once you build an audience and you like deliver on what you promise, which is, you know, whatever you promise on your thumbnail, better deliver it. If you say you're going to crash a Lamborghini into like a McDonald's, better do that, you know, the first 30 seconds. And I ended up missing a day, and then people were like pretty concerned about that. But I was pretty happy because I was like, oh wow, people actually
care.
Yeah, care about this. And then those people ended up like giving me feedbacks for like, you know, product development and stuff like that. Some people ended up like being creators on the platform, but I think I never really say this out loud, but I think just, you know, the key insight for me was that these are real people, and as long as you treat your content audience as real people, not as numbers, you'll start to make decisions that benefit them.
Yeah,
and then you will see so quickly that, you know, whatever you put out, whenever you start to ask instead of give, they will respond.
So the insight for you regarding GTM was, in general, you know, taking advantage of your background with content creation, and instead of doing whatever the best tactic is today, doing what you know best, and like perfecting that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was cold DMing people on LinkedIn, trying to get people to try the product and like trying to get people to like, just, hey, like I'm a founder, I'm building this thing, like, can we hop on a 15-minute call? Way less traction. Like, probably like I got maybe like 3 or 4 meetings out of that, out of like hundreds of messages. But on YouTube, like, it just worked. Like, it's just worked as long as I put out like a quality video, then I'm comfortable with asking for stuff after, and people are willing to give their time. It's just insane that, you know, content creation is like, because people sometimes, like, I talk to people and people will like, hey, I've been trying to DM people on LinkedIn and like, you know, reach out to people on X, get people to like try the product. Nobody really respond. I'm thinking about running ads. I'm like, that's probably the worst idea, because like you're gonna get even like, first you gotta figure out like what kind of ad you're gonna have to run and like what demographic, which is probably unclear right now. And then you're gonna run an ad, you know, burn some money, and then probably get like the similar kind of like response. But content is free to make. You know, low skills floor, but very high skill ceiling. So like it goes really deep, but to get started is really fast, right? Yeah. Content is such a great way to go to market. Like it's cheap. It's you just reach people. People come to you. Like it's just like so clear to me. And I think that, I don't know about you, but like sometimes, you know, when you hang out with like when you hang out with Gen Z and millennials, maybe more so Gen Z, especially Gen Z founders, they understand why content works.
Yeah, it's natural to them.
When you hang out with like founders who are a little bit later stage in their life, I've never gotten a good advice from a founder who's like a little bit later in their stage in life, and they're like, why are you doing this, you know?
Yeah, I was already familiar with it because of Heyorka, because that was MarTech, and that was like, you know, social media was everything, right, in MarTech. But yeah, you're right. Like if you think about it, like how many of these successful founders, whether it's, I don't know, Airbnb, Uber, Twitter, whatever, if they're online characters or not. And then if you look at like the new wave of maybe entrepreneurs who are always like, and the advice is like build a community first, and then they're trying to be like an online character first before they even have the business idea, have a following before they have the business idea. So I definitely think like there's a shift in terms of how the Gen Z, you know, founders think about content marketing. it's a crazy story, but like I've been watching Kardashians.
For business purposes.
It's it's playing and I'm like, oh, what is this? And I'm not doing anything, so I would naturally watch it. But that's their whole business, which is crazy. Like it's so weird.
Just the whole show is just brand awareness, right? It's just playing, and now you know about the brand.
And then you see them doing like, I don't know, like collabs with these clothing brands or whatever that I'm not super familiar with. But like they're not qualified to do that, but they do that just because of the brand name, right? And that you said that you have the brand and following, and then it doesn't matter what you link to. People have feel that trust.
Absolutely. I feel like in my past life I was like in advertising or something. Like these things.
You were at TikTok,
these things just came to me, and it's just like I feel in my bones why certain aspects of brand building make sense. And it's kind of hard. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's kind of hard to explain to somebody who's not in that space that you can dump a bunch of money into brand and it will pay off later on.
Yeah.
Like whatever you put out later, you will see traction like ASAP if your brand is like built properly. And it all comes down to like the experience of one person looking at your brand. At least in my head, it's like, how is the experience of somebody consuming my YouTube content when it comes to like down to one person? Like what is their journey like? And it comes to me very intuitively that that person should enjoy their time watching the video or get certain types of values out of it here, there, and these timestamps, and like they might be looking at description this way, and like just following that journey in my head and like craft it out so that they have a good time. And if I can do that for them 3 or 4 times, whatever I ask them, they will be very likely to give it to me.
Yeah.
Because you got to give first before you ask, right?
Exactly.
Especially for like strangers on the internet. It's just people like to look at these views numbers as like just numbers. They're looking at like, oh, if I do this will go up. If I do that, this will go up. And same thing goes for community as well. Community is kind of not now, but like it became like almost like a go-to-market strategy during like the Web3 era, like when it first became popular. And people look at those communities as like numbers. But it's unless it's like something super hot like Web3 back then, when you build a community from scratch, if all you do is like, promote your brand and stuff like that, and people don't even know why this stuff hurts their brand too, it all like on the principle level, it all comes down to like what value you're bringing to the person who gets into this community. Like if you bring them enough value, then you have the permission to ask. Then you have the permission to expose them to your brand. And if you can take it a step further and say that you should argue with yourself that, oh, is my brand even good for this person in my community to even bring it to them? Because if you can craft that kind of journey, then it'll be a long-lasting brand. It's a really strong foundation. You can then build on top of that, and if every step you take adds more value to the person in the community or your audience, and you think more about them than you, then this will work. And it doesn't matter what kind of like the hottest and latest tricks in marketing would be.
Yeah. So thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to see what you do with Cats with Bats.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for having me in this beautiful space that is your apartment. Like, holy cow.
I appreciate it. We'll see you next time here, maybe with a lot more customers and maybe a co-founder.
Maybe an AI co-founder.
I wanna give you some bad advice. You heard it right, bad advice.